Welcome to the SALVANT report, and thanks for the privilege of your time. My name is Le Grand Parisien SALVANT. To help you understand the world we live in, the SALVANT report has garnered information from a lot of sources using their most recent report to shed light on multiple events happening around the world. And today, we're going to give you a brief history of U.S. government shutdown, since that's the only one thing that people are talking about. The federal government is still shut down. And today is the 12th day of the federal government shut down. The United States government has shut down as of October 1st because lawmakers couldn't pass funding laws for executive agencies for fiscal year 2026 on time. They have 12 appropriations to pass every year, and one cannot remember the last time this Congress, the Republican and Democrat, could pass funding laws for the agencies of the federal government. While political disagreement over the national budget are not unique to the United States of America, government shutdowns are and have unfortunately occurred several times over the past few decades. This is number 21. Government shutdown not only interrupt crucial services and programs, but they also impose costs on federal agencies. And we're going to give you an idea and explain the history of government shutdown in the United States of America and how other countries avoid them. The top Republican and Democratic leaders, they remain deadlocked with little sign of a way out. And for the 7th time, the Senate voted on an effort to end the shutdown, but neither party is budging. Neither party is budging. And what now? It appears to be a game of chicken, with the way out likely coming down to who wins the messaging battle and which side feel the most pressure. In the meantime, it's causing the federal government and also people working for the federal government are suffering. What did the federal government shut down this time? A partisan argument over if and when lawmakers need to act to extend subsidies for the Affordable Care Act marketplace led to the current shutdown. A same thing happened also in 2013 when former President Obama wanted Congress to fund the Affordable Care Act, which a lot of people know of Obamacare, which is a name that the Republican gave to that Affordable Care Act intentionally to make sure that people will understand, and some people would say, we don't need that thing at all. And this is the reason why, at this time, the federal government shut down. Let's go back to the beginning of the shutdown in America in the 1970s. Before the early 1980s, federal agencies simply kept operating when appropriation had expired, known as, in their language, funding gap. The agencies minimize all non-essential operation and obligations, believing Congress did not intend for agency to close down. Some of the activities that agencies will refrain from during this period were hiring, grant making, and non-emergency travel. In the 1970s, appropriation legislation started getting tied to contentious policy issues such as abortion and school integration. And that has caused 6 funding gaps in fiscal years 97 to 1990, which range in duration from 8 to 17 days. In 1980, reacting to those increasingly frequent funding gaps, President Carter asked the United States Attorney General, Mr. Benjamin Civilecci, to provide an opinion on how to interpret funding gaps from obligating or expending federal funds before an appropriation is enacted or above the amount specified in laws. And President Jimmy Carter wanted an opinion from his Attorney General. Benjamin Civilecci, he was the U.S. Attorney General, and President Carter wanted for him to interpret funding gaps in the context of the Anti-Deficiency Act. He needed an interpretation of that act. The Anti-Deficiency Act prohibits agencies from obligating or expending federal funds before an appropriation is ignited or above the amount specified in law. What happened next? Mr. Civilecci, the Attorney General, issued 2 opinions about the interpretation of the Anti-Deficiency Act, one in 1980 and the other one in 1981, which shifted the norm for government agencies operating with limited capacity. The opinions stated that federal agencies may not spend money at all when there were no appropriation. federal agency not to spend any money when there are no appropriation, with a few exceptions. And these exceptions were very practical. One exception is for spending money to close agencies in an orderly way, an orderly fashion. The second exception, or another exception, according to the Attorney General, Mr. Benjamin Civilecci, is to allow spending where there is a connection between the agency's functioning and the safety of human life or the protection of property. There have been 21, or let's say 15 funding gaps since the Civilecci's opinions, including the government shutdown that began on October 1st, 2021. Since many of those funding gaps occurred for a brief time or over a weekend, there was no widespread government disruption. 4 of those funding gaps, however, lasted 4 or more business days and broadly impacted government operations. And the longest of those shutdowns lasted 34 full days. And it was from December 22nd, 2018 to January 24th, 2019, when the actual president was number 45. And the most recent funding gap that we're living what now is ongoing. And we told you that the reason the partisan argument over that shutdown is just because Republican and Democrat needed to act in extending subsidies for the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, and there were no between the Republican and Democrats. Let's say that 24 million people who do not have insurance through their jobs or a public program like Medicaid use the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, that system to buy health plans. Prominent Republicans, lawmakers, have claimed the Democrats are looking to provide tax dollars to help for the health care of undocumented immigrants, which is not true. It is a lie. That is not true. Undocumented immigrants do not have access to the Obamacare, to health plan. And Democrats in the Senate refuse to vote for the Republican short-term funding bill that passed the House, but it didn't include an extension of the health care credit. Here we are. The misunderstanding, what they are fighting for, the argument, partisan argument. And for the 21st time, the federal government of the United States of America is still shut down. And Democrats are also hoping to repeal cuts to healthcare programs that were put in place as part of the GOP spending and tax bill that passed over the summer. And they are still fighting. They're still fighting, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what will it take for the government to reopen? As we approach week 3, there has been no progress on ending the shutdown. And we're going to give you a little scenario regarding how the shutdown is affecting some of the states, because the shutdown of the federal government affects different states different way. Republicans in the House of Representatives have already passed a measure that will temporarily fund the government until November 21st. But in the Senate, Republicans so far do not have enough Democratic support. It's the fight, Republican and Democrats in Congress, with your life, with your health care, which they don't care because they have theirs. There is no clear way out, as both parties are in who blinks first mode. Who blinks first? However, here are a few potential scenarios for how this could end. Let's go for scenario number 1. Democrats fold. Enough moderate Democratic senators side with Republicans to overcome a filibuster and pass a funding bill. That could happen if public pressure becomes too great. Boom. The Democratic lawmakers fold. They give up. Scenario number 2. Republican overstep and feel pressured to the negotiating table. The longer the shutdown goes on, the greater the possibility that Republicans could take the brunt of the blame. That could be the case if the president's budget director, Mr. Roosevelt, gets his way and goes through with his threats of mass firing and cutting off billions of dollars to blue state. The blue state, meaning the state for the Democrat, where you find a Democratic governor. We got blue state, we got red state. Blue state Democratic, red state Republican. Or this guy, the budget director, is threatening to mass firing and cut billions of dollars to blue state. Something that is not necessary, because people are going to hurt. You're going to hurt people, you're going to hurt families. But he did that maybe intended to get Democrats to cave. The president has also floated the idea of not paying back furloughed federal workers when the government reopens. If you want to do that, which will be illegal. According to the law, these guys must be paid after the appropriation is passed. Scenarios number 3. It's also possible that leaders on Capitol Hill across the aisle cry uncle and vote for more time to negotiate on health care measures that Democrats have been looking to include in the deal. The White House certainly seems to see that it publicly has to show concern about health care, and that could be reflective of the fact that support for the Affordable Care Act is at a near record highs. Very different from the 2010s when the law contributed to Democratic losses. It's different. The last shutdown lasted 35 days in 2018. What it will take for these Republican and Democrat to agree on something and for the government to reopen. One thing we know, the U.S. Postal Service operation will not be interrupted. You're going to receive your letter. You're going to receive your packages. Because in the event of that shutdown, according to a statement put out by USPS, they are self-funded and they don't depend, the USPS doesn't depend on the appropriation process to continue running as usual. Thank God teachers in school won't be directly impacted, but federal education functions might in some places. Do government shutdown happen in other countries? Is it something typical only for the US of America? Government shutdown do not occur in peer country because their government, I want you to hear that, government shutdowns do not occur in peer countries because their government do not react to a lapse in funding bills by shutting down operation. Instead, they implement shorter-term solutions, such as continuing to operate the government at the amount budgeted the year before, or longer-term solution, such as holding election so a new government can pass the annual budget. For the United States of America, Congress has 12 appropriations to vote on every year. And as my research indicates, I cannot find a year when these guys came to their senses and approved all the 12 appropriations. Let's take Germany. In Germany, a federally parliamentary republic, delays in passing the annual budget are typical in election years. Very typical. However, that doesn't stop the government from operating. Germany's law states that if the legislature doesn't enact a budget before the start of the fiscal year, funding continues at the previous year's amount to maintain institution, meet obligations, and continues construction projects, benefits, and services. This is a responsible government. Maybe people care about the well-being of their constituents. Let's take South Korea. South Korea utilizes a presidential system like the US. South Korea utilizes a presidential system just like the US, but respond to delayed annual budget similarly to Germany. Instead, if South Korea's legislature is late enacting a budget, a provisional budget, meaning conforming to the budget of the previous year, goes into effect immediately to maintain and manage institutions established by law until the new budget is enacted. Germany, a federal parliamentary republic. South Korea, a presidential system like the US, using the same thing, but they use the last year budget to manage and maintain institutions established by law. The United Kingdom, a primary democracy and constitutional monarchy, has a different reaction to an inability to pass a budget. What do? For the United Kingdom, failure to pass a budget can instigate a vote of no confidence and then an election. It becomes the new government's job to pass funding legislation. Some countries allow time for the process to play out, please, such as Germany and South Korea. Other countries identify the inability to pass a budget as a structural problem with the current government, like in the United Kingdom. What those countries share is the understanding that their government must not, I repeat, must not shut down because of their legislature's impasse. Germany, South Korea, United Kingdom, and some other countries, they share is the understanding that their government must not shut down because of their legislature's impasse. how this shutdown is going to affect the national parks. Some places it will. And there could be also missed paycheck and lost job, because some federal employees are going to be furloughed. And that's why the president said it threatened not to pay them their money back when there is an appropriation, or an appropriation is enacted. But perhaps the biggest impact will be felt by federal workers and active duty military service members who will not receive a paycheck during the government shutdown. Here are these people, active duty military service, defending the country, and they may or may not receive their paycheck. And the Congressional Budget Office estimated last week that roughly 750,000 federal employees would be furloughed each day of the shutdown. Now this is 12 days. Take out your calculator and you 750,000 times 12 to see how many employees from the federal government already affected by the shutdown. However, ICE, the immigration cases and enforcement are proceeding as usual during the government shutdown. They're not going to be affected. Customs inspection and immigration law enforcement are considered essential function that will continue doing any lapse in appropriation, though workers may not get paid until the shutdown is over. What about the state? What about the state? For Alaska, the U.S. Transportation Department said he has secured funding to continue the Essential Air Service program, subsidizing route to 65 Alaska communities and more than an additional 100 communities nationwide. 50,000 federal employees live in Alaska, one of the highest percentages of federal employees when compared with other states. And the American president threatened that federal employees could receive termination notices, increases the uncertainty around this crucial workforce to Alaska's economy, and it could be affected. In Arizona, Governor Kathy Hobbs said last week she will not spend state funding to keep Grand Canyon National Park open should the government shut down. In California, the shutdown of the federal government has brought the full or partial closure of many National Park Service sites across California. In Colorado, sites and land in Colorado operated by the National Park Service are open, but some service may be limited or unavailable. Connecticut will continue federally funding food assistance program for state residents during the government shutdown. Governor Ned Lamont said, "Thank you." Georgia, federal workers living paycheck to paycheck. One option to get through being furloughed could be filing for unemployment insurance. Good news. That's the Georgia Labor Commissioner, Barbara Rivera Holmes, said last week. For Kansas farmers face several uncertainties as payment for some federal programs are in limbo. Louisiana, the National Food Insurance Program, or NFIP, is managed by FEMA and provides flood insurance to those who don't have a private option. It has grown in size as most homeowners' insurance policies across the U.S. have dropped flood damage entirely. It covers nearly 500,000 Louisianans. The policy holder with expiring contract could lose coverage, and funds to pay claim have dropped $30 billion due to the shutdown. So good luck to the people from Louisiana who has homeowners insurance and do not have flood damage. In Missouri, family enrolled in the Missouri WIC program, which provides supplemental food, nutrition education, and support to low-income women and children, will not be immediately impacted by the shutdown. Good news. New Hampshire. There are more than 5,000 civilian federal employees in New Hampshire at the Naval Shipyard, the Manchester VA Medical Center, the White Mountain National Forest, the Berlin Federal Prison, the Passport Processing Center at Pease, and at other federal agencies. How the shutdown might affect them is not entirely clear. North Carolina. After the federal government shut down, cut staffing and services at Great Smoky Mountains National Park, local government and non-profit in the region step up to foot the bill. Good news. North Dakota. The state-owned Bank of North Dakota is partnering with local banks and credit unions to provide short-term low-interest loan to federal government employees and members of the armed services stationed in North Dakota if they experience financial hardship because of the federal government shutdown. Good news. Good news. And what about Texas? U.S. Custom and Border Protection employees who inspect cargo at the 32 other official ports of entry are among the essential federal workers who must remain on the job unpaid. They are the one inspecting the cargo at 32 official ports of entry. They consider them as federal worker, essential federal worker. They must remain on the job, but they won't get paid. And Wyoming, the governor on October 3rd, Mr. Mark Gordon, said Wyoming will cover gaps in funding to federally funded state employees who are in the state budget in the short term. How to come to an end to this? How to conclude that mess that happened 21 times in the history of America? Just give you a brief history of the U.S. government shutdown. Government shutdown are expensive for the government, interrupt federal program and services, and disrupt the federal workforce. Rather than engaging in short-term budget brinksmanship, policymakers should work on bipartisan solution to put the United States of America on a long-term, sustainable fiscal path. This is the SALVANT report. Next week, you have it.